with that is that your view on, really finding what matters in your life. And then on top of that, you have this kind of personal leadership that's the heart of your book, is you actually do speak to this idea of you don't just get to, you kind of have to be intentional with your life,
Yeah.
which is just, just keeps resonating with me since I first met you, but then since I first read the book about a year ago. But it, right now, especially, and when I first met you, there was an intention,
Yes.
probably about 5 years ago,
Yeah.
that it felt like it had happened, and this change of view had happened for you. Were you aware when that happened? Was that a conscious shift? Was it a wait, I get to choose? What did that transformation kind of
Yeah,
look like?
yeah. So I think for me, what happened was I always had that travel part in there. And then I was in a moment of real personal crisis. I was married. I'm not married anymore. I was in the middle of that whole not being married anymore process of a divorce. And I was making choices about what I wanted to do with the next phase of my life. And I had this one point of decision. Oh, by the way, they told the company that I was working for. So I also had like lost my job and was just, in the middle of just a lot of personal turmoil. And kind of looking at myself, I was in my early 30s and kind of like, well, what are you going to do? How's this going to work? And so I was in the fortunate position to have sort of two different job opportunities. And one of them was very much stay in the US, do consulting. It was a very logical and good and safe choice. And one was the choice to move back to Argentina, because I was there twice, move back to Argentina and earn devaluing pesos and do something that really didn't make a lot of sense for me. And I was looking at those two things, and the decision for me was, if I took the consulting job, there would be a Friday night when I would be stuck in O'Hare Airport, was snowed in, not able to get home, and I'd be going, I could be in Argentina right now. And when I was in Argentina, there would never be a moment going, I could be stuck in O'Hare right now, And so that was the moment, that was the first step. That was the first choice of this real intentional path. But I don't think I realized it then. I think I realized it a little later on, that this path of making choices to be able to choose jobs, choose cities, choose careers, choose relationship arrangements that work with a lot of travel or living in different places, that was the first step on that path. But the realization came a couple of years later with some other choices about jobs and cities and things like that.
So I think, anytime I come to you with a game plan,
Yeah.
we veer off of it pretty quickly. So that's going to happen now.
Okay.
At least we're skipping the order.
He wrote some questions down, and we're going to go off track.
Well, I'm basically hitting them just in very different order than I told you I would.
That's fine.
That time, Argentina versus Atlanta.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a lot more about this, 'cause some of the resistance of people really being able to own their lives and figure out what it looks like. But that right now is so visceral for me. When I say that your ideas have been bouncing in my brain for a year, part of those is, I've told some of my students it's only in the last 5 years that I realize I get to choose what I do. That's never been the case. It's always been, well, I go to college and then I get a job and then I, and for the first time ever, it's I can do anything.
Yeah.
That thing that you did would petrify me. Like I would physically freeze if I was in that situation. And probably more importantly, once I made the decision, that's not comfortable for me. And I would fall back into, well, this was a mistake. Let me go back to what I know. How did that not happen?
Yeah. It's scary. I'm not going to lie. That was scary. And it was sort of like, well, I didn't really have a lot of other great options. And a little bit of it is like the whole Cortez strategy. You guys remember the Cortez, the guy who had the ships and he burned the ships so people couldn't go back and leave and you had to stay. A little bit of it, that's a really bad historical summary of Cortez. But anyways, a little bit of that, like, cut off all your other options to make this one have to work. And I think also part of it, when I was growing up, I remember a million times, those things that your parents always say that you remember that you've heard a lot? My dad would always say, you make a decision and then you make it the right decision. And so for me, that was a big part of it, is like, okay, I am making this decision to choose one thing over something else. And then I'm going to put all of my energy, effort into making it the right decision. And so I'm going to use all of my resources, the energy, whatever, instead of going back and thinking about that other decision and just trying to make that decision the right decision.
I love that. Have you always had that? that idea of
Well,
like,
I've had that voice in my head my whole life. Yes.
have you always believed that voice?
I think that it's been really helpful for me. And I haven't been a person who's gone back and questions lots of decisions. Obviously, there are, questions that have gone back and looked at, but I think that having that framework of you're always going forward and kind of evolving and changing and embracing whatever that next phase is going to be about has been an important part of it. Yeah.
I love that. So